Hello and welcome to Retro Power Uncut, episode 163. Now Nat's away this week, so you've got me for the whole tour again. You'll have to excuse my slight lack of technical detail in the metal shop as usual, although I'm hoping I can make up for it because we're going to do a little tour of the Land Cruiser at the end of this video. Because it's ready for handover, I want to kind of do a summary of the whole build, all the details on it, because they're quite subtle in some cases and sometimes need pointing out. However, in the meantime, we're going to start with Project Churchill. So we're in the last stages of metalwork. One of the things we're working on is getting all the bright work fitted up on the car. So there are side mouldings that basically run the whole end of the car. Traditionally chrome. In our case, on this car, we're going to be doing them as a polished copper finish as the final finish. But of course, a lot of them are non-standard. The doors are obviously a lot longer than normal. The rear quarters are completely different to normal. I think previously we showed Stu making the sort of pointed end pieces that finish the rear end of the quarter panel mouldings. But also the curvature of those is completely different to standard. So one of the things Stu's been on with is making a little tool, which is basically just 3 pins in a sheet of steel with, I think they're nylon rollers on there, that is machined to kind of be a reasonably snug fit around the profile of those mouldings. And then he's used that to form that curve onto the rear moulding. So we actually managed to get, I think from Martin Roby's down the road from us, they make up these side mouldings and they start with quite a long length, because obviously what we've ended up with is a rear quarter that's longer than any of the original parts on the car, so we couldn't modify an existing trim. Whereas for all the other parts, we could modify an existing trim. The doors, for instance, we could use the bonnet one, which is longer than the door, and cut it down. But the rear one is longer than anything standard. So we got some just lengths of unformed moulding from Martin Roby's. And then Stu's made a little tool to roll the curve onto those to get them to the right shape. And then I think all of the others we were able to make from existing trims. So as I said, the door ones are from the bonnet ones are standard. The one between the bonnet and the door is slightly longer than standard because we've actually altered the way the gutter sits on the car. It's a bit that we've never liked on these cars, is that the gutter comes all the way down to the top of this point here. And you have a chrome gutter moulding that doesn't finish that last part. It lines up with the chrome that runs along the bottom of the windows on the door, which makes perfect sense because you've got a sort of chrome moulding set that completely borders the windows. But you end up with this random bit of gutter that's not got a trim on it, and it's incredibly hard to sort of do the paint prep work around. So we decided on this, there was no reason to have that bit of gutter there because the rain still goes into the door shut lower down anyway. So we removed that, welded up that corner, included that in the lead work, so that's just a nice smooth shape that we can go through. But yes, consequently that trim is slightly longer than standard, so that was made from a trim elsewhere on the car, probably a rear door trim. And then the ones on the top of the door and the top of the rear window are obviously also non-standard, so we've made them cut down from longer mouldings as well. So at this point it was getting the holes drilled, all the rivets fitted, making sure we were happy with the lines, spent quite a lot of time looking at the line of those and making sure it's a nice flowing line. A couple of little alterations. Stu's, in fact, I think right now he's literally just re-drilling one of the holes on that door because there was just a slight wobble in it. Getting to the point where we're happy with the shape of all of those, and then we can take them off. All the rivets will be removed again at this point, and then what we'll do is when we go through the bodywork stage, when they're doing all the initial filler work and block sanding, we'll probably refit all of the mouldings a second time, and then they'll come off again before final paint, and then we'll put a third set of rivets in after it's been painted before we put the final trims on once they've got their final copper plated finish. So that's that, and then actually, as you can probably see, we're doing the strip down, so happy that the dry build process is done. Doing all of the strip down, then the car's going to go on the spit. So that's something that Tom's been on with a fair bit this week, is actually making the mounts for the spit. Because this car's never been on a spit or rotisserie, it's always been on either the jig, and then it was moved from the jig to being on the ramp. So we've never had it on a rotisserie as it stands. In this form. We had the spit to do a standard Mark II shell so we could blast it, but now we've reshaped the rear and the front, we've got to do mountings in a different way. So they're making up the rotisserie mounts for this, stripping down all the parts, making sure everything's kind of bagged, labelled, reference media, photos are taken, any notes are made that need to be made at this stage, so we've got all that recorded for the final build. And then yeah, this will be back to a shell, onto the rotisserie, and then there's quite a lot of underside welding because we've only had it on the jig or on the ramp. There's a mounting probably is a better, I was going to say mounting, but a mounting is probably a better word to describe the amount of welding we've got to do on the underside, because all of the stuff that needed welding on the underneath we've not done yet. or certainly the bits that were going to be a pain to do neatly. So get it on the spit, load of welding underneath. With the engine out, there's a little bit of remaining dry build related work in the engine bay, so just welding in some bosses for hoses, battery cable mounting, etc. in areas that were going to be too awkward to do it with the engine in. But yeah, excited to see this pulled apart now. And bonnet and boot lid, in fact, have already gone through to the body shop, so they can start doing the stripping and epoxy priming and protection work on those. I think we're going to have the doors off soon as well, so they can make a start on those. So yeah, looking forward to seeing that take shape. If we stroll this way, Redux number 4, a few areas of attack. We were doing the arch clearance work on this side last week. Sam's carried on, he's working on this side. So basically we take the inner arch area back, English wheel up a new infill panel in there, which gives us more wheel clearance for the larger wheels that go on the car. They're also doing the revised area of the bulkhead here because we have our own billet machined expansion tank that sits in there. So that area is refabricated to fit that perfectly and have the mounting points for it. He's carried on doing the sort of hole deletion in the engine bay, deletion of all the holes and studs and mounts for things that are no longer in there. And this area here, which is a completely refabricated part of the inner wing, which mounts the dry sump tank down through here. So you have a top section that's where the fill is. Most of the volume of the tank is actually underneath, and it passes through the inner wing to achieve that volume. So yeah, progressing well on that. If you follow me, we'll skip through to next door. Bobby should be back next week with his bionic teeth, so yeah, good to get him back in the flow on the Allegros. In here, I'll briefly dwell on the Mustang because I can see the door cards here in my line of sight. We've been battling for ages, and it seems a ridiculous thing to say. We've been battling door cards because they essentially came unclipped very easily, and we were battling a better clip combination than the OEM clip combination to stop that happening, and eventually came to the conclusion that with the combination of the doors being a reproduction part and the door cards being a reproduction part, and they have like a chrome or stainless steel moulding around them, they just didn't fit. They were being held away because the profile and the shape of that wasn't exactly the same as the door. And because they were being held slightly off, the clips mounting them, no matter what clips you used, ended up only just kind of over center or kind of past their latching point, and so they came off very easily. And you would think that would be a simple problem to solve, but after going around the houses a lot, trying to reshape them, trying to reform that stainless bit, trying a million combinations of different clips, we've just decided to go with a different style of door card. So this is a different type that you can get that doesn't have the chrome moulding around it, but then it doesn't have that on the back ones anyway. So we've basically thrown in the towel on trying to make these shonky reproduction parts fit and gone with a different pair of reproduction parts which do actually seem to fit. So that's good news. It's always the gamble because we thought, well, we'd probably just order another set of cards that also don't fit. But we figured as they don't have the moulding around the edge of them, there's less chance of that. And yes, true enough, they do fit nicely. So hopefully they'll be in soon and we can put that one to bed. Stratos, which is just out of sight to the side of you. We were having a little look at the headlamp. It had a lazy eye, basically. One of the right-hand headlamp was being very slow to raise and had a habit of tripping the fusing on it, on the PDM. So we had a look at that. I thought it might be electrical, but actually it's just that the linkage had gone sort of stiff on it. So we've just lubricated the linkage on it and now it's fine. So that's good news. Escorts then. So Project 1, basically there's a lot of progress on both of these simultaneously. Anthony's been working on all the fuel lines and brake lines, so we've got all of those mocked up, cut to length, all the fittings worked out, and then they'd all gone to be crimped and are back here now. Fuel lines are in on this one now. That one, they're also in, and that went hand in hand with the fitment of the fuel tank. So Anthony's got the fuel tank in, fuel filter, fuel pump, all the fuel lines, the fuel pressure regulator. So aside from the fact it doesn't have an engine, the fuel system's pretty much buttoned up on that one. And on the subject of fuel system, James was on with the filler necks. So this is a combination of parts. We designed our own billet caps for those, for these two cars. And then the neck that those screw onto is basically a flange that bolts to the original mounting point on the body. It's got a threaded neck that comes out from there, and then a sort of stub on the inside, which our plan was then to minimise the number of joints. We were going to weld an extended sort of aluminium tube to that comes very close to the tank, and then we just have one rubber joiner to the tank, rather than kind of having intermediate joiners at both ends. But because of that, we need to get the orientation right, because we want the cap to tighten up at the right angle each time, because it's a sort of directional shape. So we designed the cap such that the sealing system is an O-ring on the outside of a spigot rather than being a washer between the two. So there's the tightness you do the cap is completely set, because it goes when they're metal on metal rather than relying on how much you compress the gasket. So what we needed to do then was get the cap on the neck, tightened up, make sure it was aligned correctly, and then mark it, so we then weld the pipes on the inside of it in the right position. With all that done, those necks can be anodised, and then they'll be ready to go in for the final time. Caps also are going to be ready to be anodised. I had the customer for this car over, and he was just okaying the accent colour, basically anodising colours. So we were deciding whether we were going to go black on the door handles or bronze. Same on the fuel cap, and there's various other accents on the outside, like on the wing mirrors, which we adjust in the final stages of machining. In fact, I think Luke's just 3D printing the final prototype of those now, but we can certainly show you the CAD of the mirrors. So there's an anodised accent on those too, and after much deliberation we decided to go black anodising on the door handles and mirror details, but bronze on the fuel cap. This one's still to be determined, and it may be led a little bit by the interior choices, because we've also got going on the inside of the car, there's loads of machined parts, and on this one the bulk of them are black, and then the sort of accent parts, so things like the badges on the speaker grills, bezels around the instruments, are going to be bronze. This car, it's undecided, because we haven't chosen the interior colours yet, so we're still toing and froing with the customer on the exact sort of interior design choices. Looking at various leather samples, sending samples to and fro. This client lives overseas, so that process is a little bit longer than it can be with other people. So I have to send samples over there, wait for him to have a chance to look at them, get the feedback, and then do the next set of samples. But we should be getting there pretty soon on that, and then that will then dictate whether the main aluminium parts in that are black or silver. And then that will probably dictate the accent colour as being potentially a graphite grey, is what we're thinking. But if the parts end up black on the inside, we could go with silver accents. If they end up silver, we could go with black accents. So it's up in the air a bit on that one. We got some of the machine parts through, so the gear knob has now been machined, and that's turned out really, really good. We've probably mentioned before, we incorporated basically made a little PCB with a LED controller inside that goes inside the top of the gear knob, and it's got machined holes in it with LEDs that then cast light down from the gear knob. So it doesn't shine directly in your eye, it's sort of underneath the knob, but it casts light over where the switches are on the centre console and where the volume control for the audio system is. And that's come through. Trial fitted the PCB, that all fits perfect, really happy with that. And then sort of hand in hand with that, Alex was just powering up the instruments, because we got through, I think showed it last week, the CAN bus controller for the instruments. So he's been bench testing that to just make sure everything functions as it should. And pleasingly, because the instruments are off the shelf ones, the whiteness of the LED light matches perfectly between the instruments and the gear knob, which is something I was hoping would be the case. And because they're all controlled by that single CAN bus controller, when you power it up, they all do like a really synchronized sweep, which is quite cool. So yeah, looking forward to getting that lot in. And then on the subject of the dash, actually, Anthony's been on with fitting the tweeters for the audio system. I should have very soon back from Dean the dash pad for the top, which means we can get the vents in. And I've just received back from Laser Etching with Bruce Holder the AC control panel. So it's essentially a Vintage Air AC system, and the knobs and the PCB they fit onto is Vintage Air, but we made our own surround with some slightly more pleasingly laid out sort of labelling on there, which has been laser etched in. So that's back now, we can get that fitted. So we're kind of starting to get things together on the dash. We're really just waiting for the anodising of the bezels on this one, and then that can all go together. So that's more or less where we're at on the Escorts. I think Gibbo's just doing all the oil plumbing, so I presume the oil plumbing pipes are away being crimped at the minute, but that was the next plumbing job. So with that done, fuel plumbing on this one's completely done. Brake plumbing, I think, is pretty much done. Oil plumbing will be done very shortly. So yeah, we're smashing through that lot pretty pleasingly. Right, let's have a little meander down this way. Speaking of air conditioning, I see Anthony wielding an electric air conditioning compressor there, which is the one for Project Kuma. I'm going to just touch on E-type. So we've been having to rein in progress on this a little bit of late, but we are going ahead again now. So Jim's been finishing off a few things. We were finishing off the installation of the Mark II Jag power steering reservoir. So we can see we've got the Xylan coated bracket in here and the sort of cast part that the main reservoir mounts to. The reservoir's painted, in fact it's just over here. Grab that carefully. So super old school looking, that's why we chose it, and you can get the replacement filters that go in that. And then we like the fact to add this cast base because it means we can use male-to-male adapters to adapt to air-equipped type hoses. That'll go on there. Looks really nice and in keeping with a sort of old school engine bay. Put that back over here. And then he was continuing with some of the plumbing, so he's going to be moving on to doing the power steering plumbing. In the meantime, he finished up this hard line that we made up for the coolant expansion. So normally that's pretty much just a rubber pipe going across there. Jim thought it'd be nice and neat, which it is, to do a really neatly formed hard line in this ATEC hard line, just with a joiner each end. And then once we've done that, we also thought there's a rubber hose normally going for the bleed on the radiator. And we thought actually that would be really nice as a formed hard line, because it was difficult to sort of hold it neatly against this without just having, you know, zip ties or something around it. So we've done a hard line on there as well, which does a neat job of finishing that. So yes, we should be pushing forward with this now. So buttoning up that power steering plumbing, and then probably moving on to air conditioning compressor mounting, alternator mounting, and looking at the air conditioning plumbing, I think, are going to be the next directions on this one. And then we'll be starting this slightly more in-depth engineering job. So we're going to be designing a new aircon and heater box unit, which will go over here, which we'll go into in more detail when we get to that stage. So that's this, and Land Cruiser. So maybe just go around the front. Do you want to just perhaps go over there and face back this way? So this, I have decided, is ready to hand over. And because of that, I thought we'd do a bit of a walk through it, because it's one of those cars where there are so many details and there is so much sort of subtle engineering and you know, fabrication, etc. But it doesn't shout modified particularly. So it tends to be one of those cars where when I'm showing people around, I have to kind of point out all the details. So I thought I'd kind of do a front to back tour of the car and go through all of those details. Some are only minor things, some are fairly major things. What I might do is just have a last sip of my Roundstone coffee and pop it down over there, so I'm ready to be able to open the bonnet. So, starting at the front, bumper being the most forward thing, we narrowed that slightly, changed the curvature of the ends, and deleted all the unnecessary holes that were in it. We also pulled it in tighter, so we shortened the mount slightly, so it's a little bit closer to the body. As close as it could realistically be without compromising the wheel clearance on it, just to kind of proportionally make it look a little bit more pleasing at the front. Spotlights, so these, I always think these cars look a bit like a sort of Tonka toy, and there's nothing that, in my mind, that goes with that sort of RC car Tonka toy image more than KC daylighters. So KC daylighters on the front. We did modify these though, they're normally chrome. We painted the backs the silver to match this, and then the bezels are black Xylan coated. And we specifically wanted to do that because when you pop the covers over, the plastic clip kind of has to slide over that bit. So we wanted something that wasn't just paint on that front bit, because it would inevitably get rubbed off over time. And then we made a mounting bar for those, which also houses the wiring. So the wiring comes up through the chassis. There's a hole under here and in the bottom of here, and the wiring for the lights actually runs up the mounting tube. Number plate mount incorporated into that. And then behind that, the front mount for the body to chassis. Normally a hinge, had quite a lot of play in it, was worried about that rattling and realised that you were never going to fold that forward. So we've just done a fixed hinge for that. Headlights, they're new sort of Y-pack sealed units, but we're running Philips Ultinon LED bulbs in those. and we've Xylan coated the bezels as well, and that's a thing throughout really. The black finish we've done on a lot of the parts that just need a thin finish on them, and we didn't want it to be painted because it wears easily, are largely Xylan coated, so things like all the bolts. The bonnet fasteners. So normally this part here, the bit that this hooks into, is a spot welded formed sheet metal part. And inevitably you get an area under it where you can't get paint in there, and you get corrosion coming out from that, and also this damages the paint very easily. So these end up looking scruffy very quickly, so we thought we'd do some billet ones. So they're machined in aluminium, black anodised. There's bosses, threaded bosses on the back of that, because obviously you need enough depth, thread depth, to be able to bolt into it. That wouldn't be possible with just this, so we've got a deep boss that's threaded on the back, which goes through holes, and then a machine part on the back that clamps up that those bosses kind of recess into. These have been stripped completely apart, Xylan coated. We replaced the hardware with stainless, so the springs in here and the pin that holds it all together is stainless. Ditto these, which should probably never get used, but they're essentially, if you ever want to fold the windscreen forward, if it doesn't have the roof on, it latches onto the bonnet there. So that's that. Let me unlatch this one. And actually, before I pop the bonnet up, the bonnet hinges, and this goes for quite a few of the hinges on the car. Originally, they're just mild steel with a mild steel pin that just rubs metal on metal essentially, and you get corrosion coming out from that, rust staining all around it. So we wanted to improve that and get rid of any play, which is a source of rattles on the car. So those are machined in aluminium, and they've got bronze bushes and then Xylan coated shoulder bolts running through them. So there's essentially no play and no source of corrosion from that. Right, I just release the bonnet. Put the prop in there. So, I mean, pushing the bonnet prop in immediately highlights one thing. So we didn't want to scuff the body up when you put the prop in there. So that's a little 3D printed nylon insert that we've made to protect the body from the bonnet prop. Bonnet prop is Xylan plated. Engine bay. So most obviously it's a non-standard engine. So this is actually, we always call it an FJ because you always associate FJ40 with this shape, but actually it's a BJ40 Land Cruiser because it had the diesel engine in it, and the FJ is the petrol variant. So it originally had a 4-cylinder diesel in it. We've replaced that with a Toyota 1UZ FE, which came from a Lexus LS400, so it's a 4-litre V8, quad cam 32 valve, I think it would be. Probably be corrected on that. But we wanted it to look old school. So we planned various changes, which we've executed. The cam covers are now a complete billet machine part, which house coil on plug units integrated into them. And then we've got this secondary cover over the top of that, which covers all of the wiring to the coil on plug units, and also acts as a conduit for routing the wiring to the injectors and various sensors, so it's not sprawling around the engine. And obviously we designed them with a bit of an old school, little bit of Cosworth DFV inspiration, because we wanted it to look really 70s, this being a 75 or 76 car, I think. Then we wanted to run a pancake filter on it, just to really add to that kind of carburetted V8 look. So we used an Edelbrock 4-barrel throttle body, which is generally designed to be a replacement for a 4-barrel carb when you want to introduce fuel injection. We've done the one that doesn't have the injectors on the throttle body itself, because we're still quite fancied having the port injection from a air-fuel ratio being even across all cylinders point of view. So we've done our own intake manifold, which holds the injectors in the original position above the ports, mounts fuel rails, which we've made ourselves as well, and then that intake manifold mounts an Edelbrock throttle body, which does the air metering and has the temperature sensor and throttle position sensors in it. And then we used a Camaro air cleaner. We've just modified the underside of it, but the top part's pretty much standard, just to give it, again, that sort of 70s look. Made our own retaining nut on the top, which is knurled aluminium, which we've kind of mimicked in a few other places. So the dipstick handle's our own knurled finish, again, same on the oil fill. And then the belt cover, the top part of the belt covers, we've done machined aluminium ones, again, just to try and aid that cool machined 70s sort of look that's going on in here. All of the cooler pack is non-standard, so the radiator we've done cosmetically very, very similar to the original. In the bottom, we've incorporated a oil to water cooler. Now, what we've done is we've actually machined a bolted flange which welds into the bottom of that radiator, and then there's a bolt-in panel which holds the oil to water heat exchanger. So it's not a welded part, so if that heat exchanger fails for whatever reason, it's actually serviceable. You can unbolt the flange and take the whole oil cooler out from the bottom of the radiator. But that does the transmission oil cooling. Integral with the radiator. Made a modified version of the original mounting frame for that, which then also incorporates the air conditioning condenser mount on the front, and then right down here we've got the engine oil cooler mounted on the front of that. And then we're trying to keep everything looking fairly symmetrical, so we did these little saddle mounts on the side to mount these fabricated aluminium tanks that Concept Racing made for us. They also did the radiator. This one's screen wash, and this one's the coolant expansion overflow. So it's a Japanese style cooling system. You fill the radiator completely, the pressure blows the cap. The connection is in the bottom of this tank, so any expansion fills this tank, and then as it cools, it sucks it back into the main system. We put I would just say a different servo master cylinder arrangement. I can't remember exactly what this is. It's an American-made master cylinder servo. Again, we chose it because it looks really in keeping in 70s, but it's a decent, powerful servo that's reasonably compact, and the master cylinder sizes were what we wanted. And then that is connected to an upgraded braking system. Now, this is where I'm probably going to wish Nat was here to remind me, but from my recollection, we changed the entire front hub assemblies, I think, to 70 series Land Cruiser. I might be wrong on that, but I think it was 70 series Land Cruiser, which enabled us to essentially use all 70 series vented discs and four-part calipers on the front. I think the only thing we had to do was a modification on the steering arm to allow the track rod end tapers to be the right size for the 70 series steering arms. While we're down in that area, we've got Bilstein dampers on it, which seem to do a fantastic job. And then the springs, they are actually the original leaf springs. We took them completely apart though, literally split all the clamps apart, pulled the leaves apart completely, blasted and Xylan coated all the leaves. And this is where Xylan, which is a Teflon based coating, is really good because it's got lubricative properties, so it's ideal for something like that. And then we made a press tool to re-clamp the leaves together using stainless steel saddles that we made. So it's stainless steel clamps over Xylan coated mild steel leaves. So that's done a neat job of that. The heater blower unit, so inside we've got a Vintage Air heating, ventilation, air conditioning unit. It's their Generation 4 setup, which is kind of the bigger one that's better because it has selectable air direction control between the air conditioning evaporator and the heater matrix, rather than relying purely on the hot water valve to change the temperature of the air. However, it's quite tight behind the dash in this, and it was preferable not to have the fan unit in there. And there was already a perfectly good fan housing here, which intakes from the louvers on the side and blows into the car, into the original heater unit. So we thought, well, why reinvent the wheel there? We'll just put a decent fan inside this existing housing. So we actually used the Vintage Air fan, machine this billet adapter plate in the top that mounts it within the original Land Cruiser housing. So you've still got the same air direction. And then we made a little fabricated manifold on the inside of the bulkhead that then ducts that into the modern Vintage Air unit, which if I have a little meander down here, pass a couple of other details, the mirrors, standard arms, but we machined all of this top part from billet, made this as a little sort of machine part that's got a cylindrical recess, and these little nylon inserts are cylindrical on the back, so they fit into there, but then they've got a sort of hemispherical concave face which mates with the ball on here. And with the glass out, you basically set the tension between these two to set how stiff they are to move, and then do up the bolts and then fit the glass afterwards. Door hinges machined, again, same reason I mentioned on the bonnet ones, so that we've got bronze bushes in there. On these, because they're quite thin where they go through here, we were a little bit worried about the strength if they're aluminium, so we machined those in stainless. Door handles machined in aluminium. You can get new reproduction handles, which we actually got to get new hardware, but they're not great quality. They've kind of got a chrome plated finish, which is a bit pitted and not great, and we wanted them to be black anyway, and in that instance it would be nicer if they were anodized, so we did a machined door handles made our own stainless steel pivot pins for those, and then some of the inner hardware, the kind of bracketry that holds it on the inside, was just new from the reproduction handles. So going back to the AC system, these are the controls for the Vintage Air setup, and they sit in what is a completely refabricated dash. So we've taken some of the core elements, this shape here and the duplicated shape of the glove box and the instruments, but then we reshaped a lot of this section here to simplify it, put the Vintage Air panel in there, simplified the layout of the switch gear, used new switches, and then we machined our own knobs for those switches, which are the design influence from that is actually taken from the locking units on the front wheels, and then they were laser etched with the logos of what they do. And then to help with the Vintage Air installation, because it's quite a deep unit and I didn't really want it massively visible in the cabin, hanging down below the dash, and we needed somewhere to put the vents, we thought, well, we might as well make an extended part of the dash. So this lower section of the dash serves exactly that purpose. It covers the HVAC unit and gives us somewhere to put these vents as well. So consequence of the upshot of all of that basically is we've got a really good heating and ventilation system in it, that's pretty unintrusive in terms of the cabin. The only area that really has suffered is the glove box itself, so that's no longer really a glove box. We've made a thin fabricated insert in there that's probably 20mm deep. It's got a USB socket in it. It's also got the communications port for the PDM, which I'll go into shortly. But it does mean there's enough space here to put your phone. So with a 90-degree USB connection, you can put your phone in here, close it up, and your phone's charging away nicely in there. And then likewise on the center console, this is all completely fabricated, so the tunnel top is there to clear the 80 series Land Cruiser transmission that we've used on this. So that's something I sort of should have touched on earlier, is that with the V8 we wanted a all mechanical transmission, so we didn't have to do any electronic control on it. And the early 80 series Land Cruisers, they have a fully mechanical transmission, but there is an off-the-shelf Toyota bell housing that will mount that to the V8, because that basic transmission carried over onto the 100 series, although they introduced electronic control to it. And that then mated up to the V8 that you could get in the 100 series, which is closely related enough to this V8 that the bell housing pattern's the same. So there is a 100 series bell housing that will make the two together. So transmission tunnel fabricated to cover that. Then we made this extra shifter housing on the top that mounts the shifters that we've used. So they're Locar or Locker, American-made gear shifters, and then we refabricated the gate pattern, the sort of metal part of that gives you the interlocks for the different gears to match the positions of the gears on both the 80 series transmission, main transmission, and the range change shifter. And then made this billet panel on the top that has the gear positions on it. It also has a USB socket, which can be used to power, charge your phone, which you can put in this leather pouch we put on the back. And also the JBL speaker, which is the sound system on this, which is mounted on a 3D printed bracket under here. Also on that panel you've got your diff lock switch, and at the back there the silver switch is the electric handbrake. So it's running Toyota MR2 rear calipers, handbrake calipers, which allow us to have a disc brake type caliper with a mechanical handbrake pull on it. And then we've used an e-stop electric handbrake system, which is essentially just a linear actuator that pulls until it feels its current, the current draw electrically reaches a certain point, and then it cuts off. So essentially it always pulls the handbrake on to the same amount of tension. So that's the system we're running on there. This area here is housing a completely revised fuel system that we've done. So we've fabricated twin aluminium fuel tanks, one that sits each side, dropped them into recesses that we fabricated into the floor, and then we made a frame that goes over the top of it. Tom handmade all of these cover panels for the top that have now been painted. Gives us, I think it's about 80 odd litres of fuel capacity. And then there's a Venturi pump that pumps the secondary tank always into the primary tank. And then an in-tank high-pressure pump on the main tank. It's a Bosch 044 pump that's mounted in tank that does the high-pressure fuel delivery. Lots of sound deadening on the underside of these, so you don't get too much fuel pump noise in the cabin. And then the seats, we handmade all of the seat frames in sheet steel. They've obviously been painted in this gloss back finish. Handmade all the cushions. They've been wrapped in leather with this woven leather in the middle from Spinnybeck. So with Spinnybet, you can basically choose any of the leathers in their range, and then they'll split them down into strips and weave them together, laminate them to a backing, much like you see in a lot of the Singer Porsches. You can do sort of variations, so it's different types of leather in the weave, but this is all the same black leather, and we've extended that to the door panels as well. Seatbelt wise, we've got just some nice classy sort of aircraft looking seatbelt buckles, and then because there's not inertia reels in this, essentially there isn't really space to get inertia reels in. What we've done is we've got fixed 3-point belts, which is what it had originally, and then to avoid when you take the belt off this falling down and chipping any paint, we've done little magnets up here on the B pillar, so you can just magnet these seat belt buckles up there. Right, is there anything else in here that I've missed? Oh, the steering wheel is the original, but we've leathered it. The column shroud, the original column shroud doesn't kind of go all the way to the dash. It leaves a bit uncovered, and you have the wire to the column stalks kind of exposed, which we didn't particularly like. So we scanned and designed our own column shroud, 3D printed it in high temperature nylon, I think it is, then wrapped that in leather. And then the instrument panel is a Dakota digital one, which is very cool. Looks almost exactly like the original, except it's all electronic, stepper motor drive. It's got a little digital LCD readout for the revs. It's got a little screen in the middle that gives you a lot of additional engine data, digital readout of your speed, etc. So really nice sort of finishing touch on the dash. Right, what else is there? There was something else I had in mind when I was poking my head in here a minute ago. Yes, the seats. The latching system. One of the things we loved about the original Land Cruiser seats was just the really simple latch mechanism to fold it forward. So we actually reused that on these, just good sort of utilitarian sprung latch. So we rescued those latch mechanisms off the original seats and transferred them over onto our custom frames. And then all of the seats are on sliding bases. That was something that wasn't great about the original. The seats were fixed, and the driver's seating position was in a ridiculously uncomfortable position. So we've made all the seats slidable. These two slide together, the drivers run independently to those two. And then when we did all the brake master cylinder conversion, we also changed all the pedal positions. So the brake pedals and throttle pedal are in a much more comfortable position. Right, so moving on, around the back. Spare wheel carrier. We stripped all that apart, powder coated it, and then the pivot pin, again, rather than being just mild steel on mild steel, we've done nylon bushes within the female and put stainless steel pins in there that we've machined. The light protection bezels are a billet aluminium part that we've designed and had machined. We've also done a neatened up version of this original kind of loop towing hitch. We've just done a pit pin on here, which is just a type of pin where you push the button and these little balls fold in on it for that. And then mentioning pit pins, we've done these little attachment points up here. The owner wanted to be able to park this up and potentially sort of string a tarpaulin out to it, or to create a sort of shady area for picnicking or whatever. So we've put these 3 lashing points on here, which again are little pit pins that you can press the button on the end and just slide that out. I can't because I'm fumbling with my fat fingers, but basically they just slide out like that. We wanted to do them with removable pins so that rather than just a loop, because if you ever had something you wanted to attach that had a pre-existing loop on it, you'd just be able to put that through and pull it back out and not have to worry about tying and untying knots, etc. Rear door hinges, as per the rest, bronze bushes, shoulder bolts. These are machined in aluminium. And then this door handle, we were quite amused by the original handle, which the pivot of it just seemed to be literally running in the skin of the door as it's bearing. So we made this little bezel, which incorporates the lock bezel, which is normally a separate part below, and then has a bronze bush in here. We machined a new handle for it, so that all runs nicely and has the visual finish that we want. Made a new number plate mount for the back, which I think this is just a generic sort of off-the-shelf classic car number plate light. The wiring for that runs into the door, and then on the inside we've done a contact pad over here, so there isn't a wire that's looping between the two that could get damaged. It's got these sprung contacts which touch on the other side there and get their electrical feed when you shut the door. And I think, I'm amazed that I managed to remember all that, but I think we're getting there. The rear seat, that's probably another thing worth mentioning. So I think this was a modified version of a seat you can get to put in a Discovery commercial to make it have rear seats. I think we had to narrow the frame slightly, but it was a good starting point, and they have these nice kind of metal bolt units on there. So on this one, you can unbolt that here and the other side, fold the back flat. Then if you want to go even further than that, you can also unbolt these 2 bolts, well, it's 2 the other side, 4 bolts from the floor, and the whole thing will go fold forward. And then there's 2 more of those bolts underneath which latch it into the side of the arch tubs down here. So you can fold that seat forward, and obviously you can also unbolt it and take it out. And this has got isofix points in here. So client here has got 2 kids, wanted to be able to seat them in the car, so the child seats can be latched into these isofix points in the back. And whilst I'm back here also, I'm catching out of the corner of my eye these battery covers. So we've relocated the batteries out of the engine bay. One of the few available spaces was the rear part of this kind of archwell area behind the wheel. So we've done recesses fabricated into there, both sides. So we've got 2 batteries there, which are wired such that it's still a 12-volt system, but there's 2 batteries providing the power, so a huge amount of capacity. And then we've also put into the lid of this one a little sort of fag lighter charging point. So you can charge your phones, etc. in the front on the USBs, but then there might be occasions where you want to use like an airbed inflator or something, which might be a bit too much of a power demand on the USB socket. So we've got a good old-fashioned fag lighter one that can produce a bit more power there. So that's the back. And I think with that, we are getting pretty close. I mean, obviously the whole thing has been stripped and a huge amount of work gone into the basic rust repair side of things. We've done our stainless steel exhaust system on it as well. So although we're using the original cast manifolds from the Lexus, everything from there back is our own stainless steel exhaust system. And then electronics was the other thing I was going to touch on. So we're running on this a Motec M130 engine ECU and a Motec 30-channel PDM. And that does away with any traditional fusing, relaying. The PDM takes inputs from all the switchgear and outputs, and obviously the battery voltage, and then outputs to all the devices on the car, and you can program how they all work. So for instance, things like the indicators, they are just an output, and you program in that you want it to flash when the indicator input is turned on, and you can program the flash rate. The wipers, for instance, you can also program the screen wash to come on with it, so it's got wash wipe function. And these are really basic things, but there are much more complicated functions you can get into it on it as well. And it's just a very reliable setup. And then the M130 engine ECU is running quite a lot of closed loop stuff just to keep a close eye on the fueling and ignition. So it's running twin knock sensors which would detect any engine detonation and back the ignition timing off accordingly. It's running twin lambda sensors which will give a wideband lambda fueling reading to the ECU at all times, and it can also tweak and change the fueling according to the readings it's getting from those lambdas. So it's a pretty sophisticated ECU system on it. Not that it's going to be a super performance orientated car, but it's just one that we want to just be turnkey, go, cruise around, effortless, and it does that. And then the sort of standard of the wiring throughout has been designed in quite a modular way. So it's a very sort of high-end specification of wiring on it. The engine harness is all a fully sealed system, so it's all Raychem DS25, DR25 heat shrink, going to a Deutsche Auto Sport connector on the bulkhead, so you can basically unplug the entire engine harness and take it away as one unit. And then we decided to take that further on this because it's a separate body and chassis. We've actually done modular plugs for all the different parts of the chassis wiring loom, and they're Deutsche DT connectors, but you can get bulkhead mounts for Deutsche DT connectors. So we've done those on the bulkhead here, one for the front left wiring loom, one for the front right wiring loom, and one for the rear wiring loom. So essentially you've got the in-the-car wiring harness, which connects to all the switchgear, all the components inside, the PDM and the engine ECU. That then interfaces to the various plugs on the bulkhead, and all of those can be unplugged. So if for some reason, and I imagine this would be very unlikely, you wanted to take the body off, wiring-wise, it's literally just unplugging those 3 plugs. So yeah, that's a probably a pretty good overview. I think I'm going to have to stop at that because I'm hurting my own ears, let alone yours. So that is an overview of our FJ40 Restomod Land Cruiser, and this is going to be handed over very shortly. Take a deep breath. I'll see you next week.